Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Marketing Matters. I'm Sarah Touchstone, Landmark Title's social media marketing strategist and educator, bringing you guys Marketing Matters live every Wednesday at 10 a.m. We bring great content to you. We've got great guests that come on. And speaking of great guests, we are joined by not one, not two, but three amazing guests today. We've got Lucas and Austin from Vali Homes, which I'm really excited about Vali Homes because Phoenix leads the way when it comes to eco-friendly, environmentally friendly, and just really unique homes. I mean, we've got earthships all over the place. So we really do set a high bar and a high precedence for eco-friendly homes, but there's some new ones that are going to be coming out. And that's what Lucas and Austin are going to be here today talking about. We've also got Adrian Bell. He is a fantastic realtor here in the area working with them, and he is so excited about these homes. I'm going to hand it off to you guys because like I said, I am a green kind of person. So I love hearing about this, and I cannot wait to hear all this great information that you're going to share with us today.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I love the energy you bring to this, and we're really excited to be here. We're going to go pretty deep building science nerd here, so buckle in and enjoy, Let's see. Alrighty, pulling up my presentation. Very cool. Okay, so this presentation is titled The Right to Health, Value Moves, and the 5 Factors of Good Building. One of the themes we tend to focus on in our work is that there's too much focus on what is done without first putting out why it's being done and how it's going to be done. So a lot of this presentation is going to focus on the why and the how, and then we'll get into the what we built at the end. And what we built through our Value Muse project is the highest representation yet of doing a good job across what we call the 5 factors of good building. So who is Vali, right? First and foremost, we're scientists. We have backgrounds in science. That's what our degrees are in. That's where our passion is. That's the approach we take. The work we do is often a hypothesis, then we prove through data of actually doing it in the real world. So a lot of building science is very theoretical. Our work is applied research, right? That's why we do a lot of development work. And once we get it right, we build something else for, future occupants to enjoy. And that's what this Vali Muse project is. You can see a rendering of the project in the background. We'll get into real photos later on. So development is part of what we do. As I mentioned, it's what we do is applied research to continue making sure that we're always on the leading edge of green building. We like to call ourselves good building activists. The point of doing this work is to spread the message out there and help people build better. And we're also concerned parents. We both have 2 young kids, and there's definitely some instability in the world right now, and we would really like to help be part of the solution. So Austin is our founder, and I am our chief building nerd, as we call it. I also am very proud to serve on the board of the Northwest Eco Building Guild. I lived in Seattle for a long time. I'm actually up visiting my mom in Bellingham right now. So if you see lots of cold wind and rain and big trees behind me, that's why that's there. One of our foundational sayings is that the ingredients create the results. Much like a good meal, if you're using organic, healthy ingredients, it's a lot easier to make a spectacular meal. On the flip side, what we see in construction all the time is that people put together these beautiful designs and they build it pretty well, but the ingredients they use themselves are flawed. It's kind of equivalent of handing a master chef rotten meat and spoiled vegetables. It might end up looking like an okay meal, but it's not going to be actually good for you or good for the planet, right? Another way to summarize this is image I'm borrowing from our buddies at Havelock Wool. They make sheep wool insulation, which we're proud to use in our project. And I think this is such a brief way to summarize this whole thing about thinking about the life cycle, the full life cycle of where the products you're using, where they came from, right? So in the case of wool, it comes from happy sheep in New Zealand The wool is actually the belly wool, which is a waste product of the industry. So they created a secondary revenue stream for the shepherds and farmers down in New Zealand. So you're helping to support a whole industry that is very much based on health and being connected to nature versus, let's say, foam insulation, fiberglass, mineral wool insulations. They come through a very, very large destructive process, right? It requires ripping up the earth, going through toxic manufacturing processes that require a lot of carbon impact to create. There's major problems there, right? So thinking about the full life cycle of products that we use, that's a really important thing to do. And the way we summarize it is, again, the ingredients create the results. So a lot of what we're going to do today is focus on the health in the building, because I think that's really the most important element. And if you think about it, pretty much everything comes down to health. Maybe that's our health, maybe that's the health of our communities, maybe that's the health of the planet, right? So health is an area that really makes sense to focus on when you're getting introduced to a very complex, big subject like this one. To make it very basic, what is unhealthy, right? When things are too hot or too cold, we get a lot of issues. When they're too wet or too dry, we get a lot of issues. So think rot, think mold, that kind of stuff like you see in the image. What's often not really appreciated sufficiently is that toxic chemicals and particulate matter are major, major, major issues to our own health in buildings, right? And what does that translate as far as materials that are used or things that are used in buildings? That would really come down to natural gas and synthetic materials. So these are two things that we really should be avoiding if we want to maximize our health, the health of the planet, and the health of our communities. I don't know if you've heard of something called sick building syndrome, but it is a very important thing to understand. It's officially recognized by the medical community. And one thing that's been really neat to see recently is how much the building science community and medical community are actually starting to communicate for once. I don't know why it took so long, but it's definitely a good thing that we're starting to communicate more. So effectively, sick building syndrome can be experienced much the same as a flu or a cold, and that comes from being too wet, too dry, too hot, too cold. Synthetic materials and natural gas tend to be the leading causes of sick building syndrome. So on the flip side, what is healthy, right? This is a very interesting question that's actually more complex than it seems on the surface, because the easy answer is, well, you've removed unhealthy materials, so now it's healthy. But it's a lot more than the lack of unhealthy ingredients. Two examples. One is, if we're going to optimize indoor air quality, IAQ, we need to not only avoid unhealthy ingredients, so avoiding non-toxic, or sorry, using non-toxic finishes, furnishings, cleaning materials, but we also needed to be adding something that provides continuous fresh air, and ideally does that through a heat recovery system, so that when we're providing the fresh air, we're not, bringing too much heat into the building during summer or making the building too cold during winter, because again, too hot or too cold is also a health issue. So it goes a lot further than just avoiding unhealthy ingredients. There's also a lot of proactive actions you need to take. So enclosure systems being, foundations, walls, roof systems, that kind of stuff, what the building is actually made out of. It needs to avoid toxic ingredients, but a really critical thing that's very often missed is we need to be able to dry faster than buildings get wet to avoid water accumulation. Water accumulation tends to be the root of all evil in buildings. So the way we see most buildings built, driving around Phoenix, right? You see OSB sheathing with an inch of EPS foam insulation taped, perforated a ton of times by staples to attach stucco mesh, and then a thin coat stucco mesh goes on top of that. That is not a building system that is able to dry. And we have this misperception that water is not a big issue in the desert, but we are, as Adrian reminded me the other day, the only desert in the world that has 2 rainy seasons, which means that our buildings do get very wet. And especially during monsoon season, they get wet when it's warm, and you can have rapidly accelerated failure in buildings. So lots of mold issues, lots of rot issues that occur very quickly. So one of the fundamental things that we need to do is stop trying to defeat nature. We need to work with the laws of nature instead of working against them, right? So that's what the assembly systems that we work on try to achieve. I love this chart. I found this the other day looking through this, forhealth.org. This is a good example of medical community, building science community working together. They came up with the 9 foundations of a healthy building. That's ventilation, air quality, thermal health, moisture management, dust and pets, safety, security, water quality, noise, lighting, and views. So these are all very important things. And it all comes down to working with nature instead of working against nature. So what is this big picture right now, right? Like, where are we at? And I would argue that humanity is going to have a pretty rough future without some major changes in equity in the built environment. And I would also argue that it's our imperative to solve this problem. This is a photo of my wife and 2 young kids on a recent trip to San Diego. And I put this in here because kind of a joke, is in, I think this decision should be as easy as tacos versus no tacos. Clearly tacos, right? Like, there is a very clear direction that we need to head. And the reward is just as awesome as tacos, right? It's happiness, it's health, it's all this good stuff, right? These were organic, healthy tacos, so it fits. And unfortunately, a lot of what we're doing as an industry may not be helping. The synthetic materials that we're adding to our buildings, such as spray foam insulation, which has become my arch nemesis over the last 2 decades of doing this work, they are extremely problematic in terms of the 5 factors of good building, which we'll get into. This material, one way to think of it is it's the next asbestos, except even worse, because it doesn't actually even achieve its primary purpose of being in, air barrier, insulation, water control. It tends to not be installed perfectly, and then water can circumvent it, and then it can prevent drying, so it accelerates rot and mold failures. You can't remove it from wood, so you can no longer reclaim wood at the end of the building's life cycle. Wood that has foam applied to it is now trash. And just on the health side of things, little pro tip here, if you have to dress up like you work for the CDC during an outbreak to install insulation, might not be super healthy. So there are a lot of certified buildings out there, and I want to really emphasize that there's so many people who think they're really doing a good thing. This was me as well. At the beginning of my career, I installed a lot of spray foam, and still I started collecting data on it and understanding better the full life cycle carbon impact, the health impacts, going back and doing a blower door test, which tests air leakage in buildings, a year after it was installed, and finding out that the air tightness we delivered a year ago was nearly gone, because buildings move a lot and foam shears off the things it's supposed to seal. So I really want to emphasize that people are out there trying to do a good thing, genuinely believe that they're doing a good thing, and genuinely want to. But unfortunately, the data does not support that they actually are doing a good thing. So we hope to provide that information, inspire people to keep learning, right? So a lot of these certified buildings don't deliver holistically. And the main ways in which I mean that are rot and mold failures and a massive amount of carbon impact. Energy efficiency is an important thing, but we can't be delivering energy efficiency in buildings through products that weren't created efficiently and have the image you can see there is a elephant made out of carbon dioxide molecules. So that's the carbon elephant in the room, right? Is that a great analogy that can be used is if you're going to go on a diet, right? We need a carbon diet for our buildings. You wouldn't go pack on 100 pounds right before you go on a diet. That would make no sense. But that's what we do time and time and time again in the built environment. We add a crazy amount of carbon up front to build an efficient building. And then the payback period is often decades, if not over a century. And the well-intentioned building then does not actually achieve its goal of reducing our carbon impact. So one great way to summarize this is sustainability is no longer about doing less harm. It's about doing more good, right? The less bad approach is no longer sufficient. We need to encourage more good, not less bad. So digging into that, this is an introduction to our 5 factors. This is how we make design decisions as a company and how we specify the key ingredients to make it actually happen, to actually achieve the goals. So the 5 factors of good building, simply put, are comfort and health, efficiency and renewables, durability and resiliency, social equity and embodied injustice, and life cycle carbon impact, right? And the argument is that we need to look at all 5 of those factors when we're making decisions, instead of just narrowly looking at one factor at a time. Say like, oh, this is an energy efficient heating system, we're good, right? It's okay, well, what kind of fuel does that heating system work and or use to operate, et cetera, et cetera. We need to have a much more holistic view of the decisions we make. So what is the goal of the 5 factors? It's a design tool. It's not a certification. There's plenty of certifications out there. This is a design tool used to make decisions, especially around product specifications. It's a guide for integrating your design of performance measures. So your airtightness, your insulation, your water control, stuff that's often kind of forgotten about or not really properly valued. We want to bring those to the forefront of decision making. And a really key element to stress is that the 5 factors works with both low budgets and higher budgets, right? Not everyone can afford high performance. That's just a truth. Fortunate as that is, I personally live in a very low performance house in Tucson, but it's all solar powered, et cetera, very healthy place. So it's what I call truly good low performance. So there's ways to, the idea of good building is it's much more accessible than other things like high performance building. So what is it designed to do? It's designed to maximize comfort and health, maximize efficiency, maximize durability, and minimize embodied injustice and minimize carbon impact. We'll get into a little more detail about what those things are, but embodied injustice is this concept I'm borrowing from my wife's field. She's a professor of anthropology. And it's the concept that there's a lot of harm done to people through the process of extracting materials, manufacturing those materials into a product, installing the product, and then the health impacts on the occupant once they're in the building as well. So that was a quick intro to get to here, and we're going to slow down and focus a little bit on each of these factors, since this is normally at least a half-day presentation that I've condensed into about 30 minutes. We're only going to go into one example of each of the 5 factors, whereas there's actually at least 10 to 20 elements of every one of the 5 factors to get into. If you're interested, we're always happy to talk about this in more detail, so please follow up with us afterwards. So with the health side of things, rot and mold are already really big risks. And as I mentioned earlier, we should really avoid adding toxicity and failure risk with the materials we use. What we're seeing here is spray foam insulation installed over OSB sheathing. This is one of the most unhealthy, high failure risk things that you can do in a building. And I'm sure that's very different to what you've heard in terms of marketing messaging that's going around the world right now.
Lucas, just real quick, how often, like, what percentage of new homes look like that inside the walls, would you say?
Oftentimes it's a little worse, right? It's like just fiberglass bats or something instead of the spray foam. The spray foam's often looked at as an upgrade. So I'd estimate maybe 10–20% of buildings. You'll see spray foam even more often in unvented roof systems, right? Because the way that code was written, which was
in Phoenix.
Yeah,
Phoenix
go ahead,
is more like 50% probably, at least. It's
yeah.
Phoenix is a huge. Phoenix is probably the largest market of spray foam in the country.
And that's just a terrifying result. I mean, if you think about this product life cycle thing, is it really even fair that we ask this person in the photo to risk exposing themselves to all these chemicals to install this? Is it fair that we ask occupants to then expose themselves to all the chemicals that are off-gassing off of this? And maybe if foam worked as an air barrier in a durable way and actually provided good insulation value, maybe, just maybe, it'd be okay then. But it doesn't work very well as insulation in our climate because there's a lot of temperature change and very high temperatures and all that stuff. And it doesn't work well as an air barrier, and it doesn't work well as a water control layer, because you may not know this, but buildings move a lot due to heating and cooling cycles, wetting and drying cycles, and also in the Northwest, especially seismic motion, right? And a big windy day, when you hear your building creaking, right? That's the building materials moving. And as the wood moves, it moves very differently than the foam. And then the foam will tend to shear off of that structural framing and cause little gaps to occur that then cause all kinds of problems with performance. So from a health standpoint, if you're not aware of something called the red list, this is definitely the thing to write down. And understand that exists. It gets added to, I believe, every 2 years. Maybe it's updated every year at this point. And it provides a list of chemicals that we know have negative health impacts for humans, right? So it becomes this list of things that we need to avoid in our building materials. The question then becomes, how do we actually know what's in our building materials? And there's a lot of motion towards addressing this in various different ways. I think the best thing out there right now is the Declare label. It's a project of the International Living Future Institute. And it's effectively similar to a nutrition label that you'd find on food. It's third-party data that's collected, verified, and then they give you a label that will tell you, is it red list free? Is it, compliant, or, has it been declared? So sometimes if it's declared, you need to read the ingredient list very carefully to understand what bad ingredients actually in there. But at least it's a step forward to put it out there and say, with full transparency, this is the ingredients that exist in this product. That's a really big deal. And stuff like this is starting to be much, much more available. Great question to ask a manufacturer if you're going to buy a product is, do you have a Declare label? And if they say, what is that? Then that's not a great start to that conversation. So efficiency and renewables is something I want to focus on. Obviously, they're both very good things. The problem is that we've had far too much focus on efficiency as a proxy for everything else, being comfort and health, low carbon impact, social justice, et cetera, et cetera. And the reality of it is that if we focus on efficiency first and foremost, we often have a lot of negative side effects and negative outcomes in the work that we do. If we focus on all the other factors first, like if we can guarantee comfort and health in a building, using natural healthy ingredients, et cetera, then we almost always end up with a hyper efficient building as a nice side effect of that other work. So if that makes sense, focusing on efficiency alone can create a lot of negative outcomes. Focusing on a holistic perspective of building almost always ends up delivering efficiency along with the other stuff. So I call this the efficiency trap. It all started back in the 70s when we kind of said, shoot, bad building isn't working out. We need to do good building. It should be healthy, comfortable, affordable, low carbon, durable, and socially equitable, right? Like, let's go, let's do this. And the response was, okay, well, good needs to be, quantified, and green is maybe too politically charged. So how about we talk about all of this as energy efficiency? Cool, solid plan. How do we do it, right? So we decided to just start focusing on efficiency. That's the metric we use for as a proxy for good building. Like, efficient buildings are healthier, right? That's something you've probably heard. Often, unfortunately, not true. But we kept focusing on efficiency more and more and more, and efficiency really caught on, right? Now there's all these standards for efficiency and ways to prove it. And then people are, funding this at a very high level, and it's a wonderful thing. Don't get me wrong, efficiency is a great element, but it shouldn't be the core element of what we do. It shouldn't be the first thing we focus on. So at this moment, if you've heard of this standard called Passive House, it's a German standard for hyper efficient buildings, extremely airtight, extremely well insulated. There's a moment where we're like, oh, Passive House perfected efficiency, the world is saved. And then, oh snap, it turns out high performance just amplifies things. It might look nice in energy models, but bad high performance is the worst building yet. Bad high performance has often used just a bunch more conventional synthetic materials, which has amplified the impact of those materials, higher carbon impact, more health issues, more rot and mold failures, right? Not the ideal outcome. So we need to go back and ask ourselves, what about these original goals of health, comfort, durability, embodied carbon, social justice? Efficiency was never the goal. It was a market-driven excuse, right? It's neither bad nor good. It's just efficient. You can efficiently do bad things, right? Like, funny example, I could efficiently eat a giant hamburger, right? And that's not great for my health. So efficiency is often viewed as a fundamentally good thing, but it's really just doing something a little faster with a little less input, and that could be a bad thing. So durability and resiliency, there's a lot to say here, but the thing we're going to focus on is water, because water tends to be, as I said, the root of all evil in buildings, water accumulation. And what we need to do is build to flow with water, right? So one of the key points is that models are often the best way to justify bad decisions. This is one of my well-known sayings, in the sense that we can look at moisture dynamics in a wall assembly or a roof assembly, et cetera, but we're making a ton of assumptions. And those assumptions almost never translate to the real world. Going back to the spray foam example, we're assuming that the spray foam is going to maintain its airtightness. But from all the data I've collected, from all the data I know of from working on over 10,000 buildings in my career now, foam does not reliably maintain itself as an air barrier. And as soon as that air barrier has failed, you get a lot of moisture loading in the building, you get a lot less comfort, and you get issues with off-gassing amplified, right? So models are not the way to justify these decisions. What we need to do is collect real world data on real products applied in the climate that we're building them in. That's a lot of the work that we do as Vali Homes, is applied research in the desert climate. And one of the sayings I like to use is all leaks are not created equal. If you're wondering why old, very poorly insulated buildings are still standing, it's because they had really, really big energy, AKA air leaks through them, right? And those air leaks took water through the building really quickly. And when the building did get wet, there was enough air leakage to dry out the building. During winter, your heating system is blasting the, warm air through your enclosure systems, through your walls, through your roof, drying out the building. And also, when the leak went through the building in the first place, it didn't have much time to leave moisture behind. Now we're entering a world where energy codes and goals of building better buildings has led to much higher degrees of airtightness and insulation, which leads to longer, smaller pathways for air to get out of a building. And when air is leaving a building, moisture takes a ride on that air, right? And the longer, slower pathway, the more moisture is left behind and the less drying potential we have. So we're really accelerating the water accumulation in our buildings, and frankly, just not acknowledging that fact. If we understand that, then we can build buildings that properly work with the laws of nature to encourage drying. But we assume buildings aren't going to get wet, especially in our climate, and that leads to a lot of failures. So
Lucas, what was that picture in the corner? What was going on in that wall?
Yeah, so that's foam insulation after a couple years. This is some drywall that was pulled off. This is an interior side retrofit, and the homeowners had reported that the foam insulation they'd blown into the walls had never really provided much comfort or anything, and kind of just smelled bad. And when the drywall was pulled off, obviously it did some damage to the insulation. But if you look on the left-hand side where insulation hasn't fallen out yet, that's what it looked like from the beginning, right? And these the failures can occur at the scale of a 32nd of an inch crack, and the cracks there are a lot bigger than a 32nd of an inch. So effectively, that insulation is doing almost nothing, right? It was just a high carbon impact, unhealthy thing that was put in the wall and caused more moisture failures to occur. It didn't really even work as insulation. So no bueno. Embodied injustice, right? This is a really, really important thing that we focus on. It was the factor that we added most recently, frankly, because it's not really our area of expertise, but the story is obvious enough that it became it's critical to talk about, right? So I would argue it's long past time to tell this story. I'm repeating that image that we talked about earlier with the product life cycle coming from happy farms in New Zealand versus problematic factories, and drawing that analogy between the manufacturing production side and the installation side, right? Like, this is a photo of Austin and I installing red list free, so completely non-toxic, healthy, durable materials. This is the degree of protection that we needed to install these materials, right? I was wearing like partial gloves. Austin's not even wearing gloves. That's the level of protection you need from these materials, versus installing spray foam, where again, you dress up like the CDC during an outbreak. That just is insane.
And Austin, you have pictures of your little boy installing insulation in a project, don't you? The Lamb's Wool.
Exactly.
Yeah. We just installed some in a little shed we're building in our backyard.
It's a great image. I mean, he's completely buried in the insulation. It's so cute.
Yeah, it's the Havelock wool insulation. Part of why we love it so much is, yeah, it's healthy enough that both of our kids have installed it. My older daughter came out and helped install some at Muse. She absolutely loved the process, and it's a demo I'll often do is take a handful of Havelock wool and rub it all over my face. And can you think of any other insulation that you would rub on your face?
No.
Yeah. So it makes a big difference. I like to call this a tale of two insulation approaches, right? There's the worst of times, that's foam, mineral wool, fiberglass. The product life cycles require ripping apart and dominating the natural world, which leads to suffering through displacement and economic hardships. Then workers are exposed to extreme toxicity, poor working conditions, and low wages during manufacturing and installation. Insulation and installation often blur together in my vocabulary. Occupants suffer then from mold, moisture failures, and sick building syndrome. Not a great product life cycle overall. Then there's the best of times. That would be wood fiber, cork, wool. I should give a shout out to the hemp wool people now. There's a US made product using reclaimed hemp fibers to create insulation. So there's some really cool naturally based insulations out there now that are produced in harmony with nature. They sustain environments, they improve lives. Workers have healthy working environments and better paying jobs. And occupants enjoy healthy, durable, and comfortable spaces. It's fundamentally different. So if you're going to switch anything in the way that you build, the way that you approach things, the way that you talk about things, it's the insulation we should be talking about. It's the easiest thing to change, and it really is the most meaningful thing we can easily change. And a way to summarize this is one of the biggest problems that happens in our industry, and this is almost invisible to anyone who's not on construction sites on a daily basis, is this saying of that work sucks, let the less privileged of some type do it. And it's really unfair that we do that. It's really messed up. And the people who are doing it, it's not like they're being paid good wages to do it either. They're being paid almost nothing to risk their lives. It's really an unfair thing that we need to change. And that's one of the things we really focused on at our Valley Muse project, is making sure we brought the craftsmanship back to construction, making sure we honor the people that do the work, and make sure we don't ask them to do anything that's risky to their livelihoods. So the last thing I'll focus on in the 5 factors, because it's the 5th of 5 factors, is life cycle carbon impact. This one gets a little complicated, but I'm going to try to keep it as simple as I can here. Going back to remembering that you wouldn't pack on 100 pounds before you go on a diet analogy, I think is a good way to think about this. When we think about carbon impact of the built environment, we're often thinking about what's called the operational use of a building that you can see circled in red on this chart. That's where energy efficiency makes a difference, right? But what we're not seeing is this massive process that occurs before products even get to a site, and then what happens at the end of a product life, or at the building's life cycle or product's life cycle. What's going to happen then? I'm going to focus on the upfront embodied carbon, often called material carbon emissions as well, for this next slide, and show you kind of how this translates into reality at the current moment. So this was a study done, it was in Toronto, but it was looking at carbon use intensity over the next 20 years of a building. And obviously, using high carbon impact materials in a low efficiency building is going to have the highest carbon impact. I think that's pretty obvious, right? But what blew a lot of people's minds is that high carbon materials in a high efficiency building, and we're talking about Passive House here, we're talking about the most energy efficient buildings on the planet, still results in a crazy high carbon impact over the next 20 years, because we haven't paid back that upfront carbon that occurs through the building materials that we use to construct an efficient building. Now, if we use mid-carbon impact materials in a low efficiency building, so basically a code compliant, code minimum building, but with lower carbon materials, that's actually lower carbon impact than a passive house built with bad materials. That's pretty mind-boggling. Then if we do a mid-carbon high efficiency building, still makes some difference, but it's really not getting to where we need to go, which is actually reducing our carbon impact. Then we get into a low carbon material with low efficiency. We're getting close now. Then we get to low carbon materials with a high efficiency building. That's passive house with low carbon materials. which unfortunately isn't affordable for most people, but that's going to create actual net carbon storage over the next 20 years. And then we get to carbon storing materials with high efficiency. And even like a more or less code compliant building built with these kind of materials is also going to be net carbon storing. So this is where we need to go towards. And if you notice, what makes the real difference is what materials you make or what materials you use to make your building, not so much the standard that you meet in terms of efficiency. Again, still ideal to do energy efficiency and make a building very high performance if you can afford it. But what is the fundamental shift we need to start making is we need to use low carbon materials to achieve whatever performance standard we're going for. And those low carbon materials are the ones I was talking about in terms of best of times. So the really good news is, again, insulation's the thing that's easy to change. And if you use the low carbon insulation, that also tends to be the healthiest one and the one with the least social justice issues, and it actually works for performance. So making the shift in insulation is really a key message to take away from today. And I'll wrap this up by saying, as we shift into talking about the Valley Muse project here, what exists below finishes typically ranges from mediocre to terrifying. There's a good reason that most people don't invite you to a building until the finishes are installed, because the finishes are there to make things look nice over all the conventional, synthetic, poorly made, high impact materials that are typically used in buildings. One example is that we see projects where performance is the goal, but there's still the wrong materials being used. It's still the same conventional synthetic materials that are being used. If you want an example of what I mean by spray foam not working to achieve its primary purpose, this is a little overhang detail. This foam was supposed to be put in there to be an air and water control layer. You can see that the foam didn't even fill it in properly. So there's still a lot of air leakage. At this point, you're still going to get moisture intrusion into there, but the foam will minimize drying. And it's made it so that this tiny little detail is extremely high carbon impact, right? So these synthetic materials don't even achieve the fundamental purpose they're supposed to achieve that well. So again, our shifts that we can make simply come down to the performance measures. Insulation's the one I keep mentioning, but it's also what we use for our air and our water control. Those things really don't make an overall difference on most budgets, and it can make a fundamental difference on how well a building actually achieves comfort, health, durability, efficiency, life cycle, carbon impact, and social justice issues. So Valley Muse, coming back to this project, we're going to start. This is a photo of it actually built now on the right. And we're going to start by going up to this this upper story deck that we have. This is what it looks like up there now. Beautifully staged. Thank you for the people who staged it. And made out of extremely healthy materials, right? This is a Koya wood. It's not your synthetic decking materials. This is actual wood that's treated to last for, you know, decades without any maintenance. It feels like butter on your feet. You're not going to get the little nasty plastic splinters from that. It looks gorgeous and it lasts, right? And we've tested that in this climate. There's an actual 3-coat stucco that's occurred, which was installed as a labor of love. It definitely takes a lot longer to do that, but it creates a much better result. And underneath, we're very proud to show you what exists beneath the finishes, right? We started doing our open houses when we were in the framing stage because we're so excited about what we've installed below the finishes. And luckily, we documented this pretty well. So the first thing we did is make the buildings look like giant Smurfs. They're fully wrapped in this blue membrane. That's non-toxic, red list free, air tightness and water control membrane that also can breathe. In other words, it can allow moisture to move out through it. So when the building gets inevitably wet at some point somehow, the building is actually able to dry. The next step was to put on a carbon storing wood fiber insulation from Germany. And two things to mention. One is this is still a vapor permeable insulation. It's actually rated as a water barrier on its own because it has a tongue and groove integration. So when it does get wet, it can also dry. So there's nothing yet in the wall system that's going to inhibit drying. If and when it does get wet, it can dry readily. You can see that we put a lot of extra effort into doing waterproofing details around doors and windows, because that's a critical little step to do. This insulation is also carbon storing up front. So it actually stores thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of carbon on the building up front. We're very proud to have recently been featured in a white paper on low carbon buildings because of this type of approach. And then you can see that over the wood fiber insulation, we started putting on a ventilation channel so that we have what's called a back vented stucco system. Stucco holds a lot of water, so you don't want to put stucco directly against your building materials. You want to separate your cladding, stucco or whatever it may be, from your performance layers below. So the 2x4 battens were put on, and then the stucco system was installed on top of these ventilation battens. And that air gap actually also really helps with insulation performance and comfort during summer and winter conditions. So this is, again, the final product, but there's a lot of magic behind the scenes. This is the living room that you enter into through the front door. And you can see this slat wall there. There's a lot of art and science that went into this as well. It's, if you know who Rick Rubin is, the hip hop producer guy, it's the same soundproofing screen he used in his recording studio. It's basically a heavy wool with the wood slats over it. And one of the things that I was actually blown away by, going into our own project, was the acoustical quality in there. You can't hear anything through the walls and windows. There can be construction literally occurring just outside the window and you don't hear it. And that was to be expected with, achieving very high levels of efficiency. Our buildings meet Passive House standards, and actually exceed it significantly. So I expected not to be able to hear outside, but what I didn't expect is to have such an incredible level of sound management within the building. You can hear conversations at different volumes. Nothing is bouncing around and annoying and giving you a headache. It just feels like such a relaxed, lovely space because of the acoustical elements of what was achieved. We can thank Austin and his love for music and being an audiophile for those elements. So here's just some behind the scenes kind of glimpses of what's behind our walls on the inside. On the left is that acoustical wall I was talking about with the heavy felt, and that's over blown sheep wool insulation. Since you couldn't see the wool insulation that well, I added this photo as well, which shows the wool insulation. And we intentionally leave that exposed behind the drywall because the wool insulation has a almost magical property of modulating humidity levels in a building, because oftentimes, obviously in the desert, our buildings are way too dry inside, which is really bad for your health. Wool has a not unique ability, but a amplified ability, if you will, to adsorb, that's AD, adsorb water vapor onto its surface. So if it gets too humid in the building, showering, cooking pasta, having a bunch of people over, whatever it might be, that excess moisture can get adsorbed onto the wool. And then when it's a little too dry inside, that gets released back into the interior to help modulate your humidity levels. It can also absorb and bind various different VOCs, including formaldehyde. And since all wood has some degree of naturally occurring formaldehyde in it, it's kind of a little hack you can do is using the wool helps absorb the formaldehyde and permanently bind it from the wood that you used in the building. So it reduces even that tiny little risk that existed. It gets rid of that as well. Then here's the kitchen area. I like to call this beautiful simplicity with healthy magic behind the scenes. You can't really see any of the stuff that makes this so special. I guess you can kind of see the ERV port up in the ceiling there. So that's the system that runs 24/7 to provide heat exchanged fresh air so that you always have the right air quality inside the house. And then there's a ton of water treatment that goes on behind the scenes so that you have nearly perfect water quality 24/7 as well. Biophilia, our natural love for nature, is one of the core elements that we focus on in our work. And really, it's a complex, deep subject that's based on a ton of scientific research, et cetera, et cetera. But the quick summary is that nature makes us happy, right? Being connected to nature makes us happy. One of the things that's come out through biophilia research is that interacting with wood will help make us happy as well. So we did custom wood handles and wood railings everywhere through the building so that you would have a physical moment to touch wood often, which frankly, from watching people tour through the building, it really does create a tremendous level of stoke, if you will. The bedrooms, this is just a glimpse at one of the bedrooms, just to emphasize that this is a place to rejuvenate and relax, right? It's really, I'm like addicted to these buildings. We were joking around yesterday on a call trying to describe Valley Muse, and my my saying was Valley Muse better than drugs, right? It creates these same pathways in our brain, the serotonin, the dopamine, being in there, it just makes you feel healthy. We were touring a local realtor through the building, and she asked me, is it okay to feel this good inside the building? And I thought that was such a funny question, because of course it is. That's the whole point. That's why we build these, because they're there to optimize human joy, if you will. And this is a glimpse into the bathroom. We were aiming for a very spa-like experience with lots of natural lighting. And again, best of the best as far as every material selection we made in the building. And there's a lot more to share there, but this was kind of the surface level tour, if you will. All the appliances are Wolf and Viking, Sub-Zero, and just it absolutely blows me away. And just especially, I want to give a shout out to Austin and his dedication to making this happen. There's been so many times throughout the process of building this where it's been tempting to try to, switch something out because it wasn't available or it was expensive or whatever it is. But he said, no, we are going to make the best buildings that we possibly can. And I respect that so much. So I'm very proud to be involved with this project. And if you want to come check this out in person, we have an open house this Saturday for Earth Day. So April 22nd, 1 to 3 p.m. You can come hang out here and experience all this stuff in person. And just to wrap it up, this is the 5 factors of good building again: comfort and health, efficiency and renewables, durability and resiliency, social equity, embodied injustice, life cycle carbon impact. These aren't the only 5 things you need to pay attention to, but these are the 5 things at minimum you should be paying attention to with every design decision that you make. And if you want our contact info, it's here on this page. You can find a lot more at valleyhomes.com. We have a very active Instagram at Vali Homes. We post on at least 5 days a week, keeping you up to date with all the work that we're doing, Valley Muse, and all the other projects that we work on. Yeah, that'll be it for the day. So thank you so much for listening, and we really appreciate you being here.
Very awesome. Now I want wood handles and railings in my house.
Isn't that amazing?
Those are so cool, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, those are the things that we connect with on a regular basis. I know I've got just metal railings up in my stairs, and I'm always have my hands on them, and I have to tell you, I hate them.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
I'm always putting my hands on them.
They're jarring, right?
It is, yeah. Those little things, those little details make so much sense. Like why every time I touch this, I'm like, ugh. Gross.
It's funny watching people at Valley Muse, you see little kids all the way up to grandparents going up and down the stairs, touching the railing, going, ooh.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I just texted my boyfriend. I was like, all right, this is what I want in my house now. That's really cool. I do have a question. If you guys have any questions too that are on, put them in the chat or the question and answer windows. But I have a question for you guys on the insulation. That's really revolutionary. Taking something that is so simple and has probably been used for, hundreds, if not thousands of years, but bringing it back, how can people that maybe would want to implement this into their current homes, are there options available for them?
Absolutely. Austin, do you want to address this one, or do you want me to go?
You can. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it's, I mean, anything that we've talked about is available for retrofit as well. It obviously is a little complicated with existing homes. You're ideally either doing a full gut or doing it all from the exterior if you don't want to touch the interior. You have to remove finishes usually to some degree to do insulation. A lot of these products can be blown into wall systems. It's a little more technical and roof systems, obviously, because you don't really know visually how well it filled everything up. So you need to use like an infrared camera or something in the right conditions to be able to see if it worked. So it can be a little more complicated, but any of these healthy natural materials can be used in a retrofit as well as new construction. One thing that's also worth emphasizing is natural materials got a bad rap because they were the original insulation materials we used. But the thing is, we really sucked at manufacturing back in the day. And now we're really good at manufacturing. We're just putting the wrong inputs into the manufacturing. So I'm not saying by any means, let's get rid of good manufacturing. I'm just saying, let's put good ingredients into the good manufacturing that now exists. Another way to think about this is its high-tech nature, right? We've put it through an amazing process to get where it's at, to be a really good quality product. But if our inputs are nasty chemicals and fossil fuels, no matter how good the manufacturing is, it's still not going to be a good product. If we start with a good ingredient and use a good process, it becomes a spectacular product.
I'll add in too quickly that we are doing consulting work with all sorts of different houses. I would say kind of skip a lot of poorly built wood frame houses. While ours are wood frame, if you've done that poorly in the past, it's challenging to undo a lot of those things. Phoenix has a lot of great block houses, with some of them with great design. Some of them, like our favorite neighborhood around the corner from Muse, you really can't do a lot with the exterior, but we're starting on like a little 1,100 square foot house in the middle of Arcadia soon, where it's a really good shape. It's a really good start, really good bones. All the framing's in great shape, all the blocks in great shapes. It's like, okay, let's take everything that's here and not tear this out. And then what are the fewest steps we can take that are the most effective, both to keep cost in line, but also just to keep a system that functions really well and meets the need for that building. So there's a lot of options. It's mostly like the interpretation of exactly how that all works, so it matches physics and achieves your goals without going crazy or doing
Yeah,
something.
Austin, you're making me remember a thing that to emphasize. One of the key things that we do in our consulting work is we create a do not use list for people first, which sounds so simple, but it's like actually game changing, right? We put together a list of materials you do not use. And then we put together a list of aspirational materials we hope to use. But what often happens if you don't have this do not use list is one of those materials you specified as good can't be used because it's not available, it's too expensive, whatever it might be. And then it falls back to the do not use material. And then the whole project's ruined without anyone really even understanding that they made that big of a bad decision, right? So having this do not use list. And the point of that is if you have the do not use list and the materials that you should use, you're gonna find a way to make it happen. Funny little example, shout out to Drew in Tucson, a client of mine that's doing a DIY retrofit. He's a young architect, bought a house, fixing it up himself. He's now hand stuffing Havelock wool into his ceiling, right? Because the material only needs to be installed to a pretty light density. It's not dense packed cellulose, it's a low density insulation. So he created a little broom handle with a little like wood stuffer piece so he can stuff in the insulation as he goes. It's such a small house that actually makes sense for that. But what kept getting specified time and time again was spray foam. And he was like, I will not use spray foam on my building, period. So what can we do instead, right? So you can find a way to use these materials. Obviously, hand stuffing is not going to make sense for a lot of people, but if you're doing the hashtag van life thing, hand stuffing insulation can make a lot of sense. There's also ways, of course, to blow this product, et cetera, but it takes a little longer. But maybe a good analogy is slow food, right? It's worth the time. So slow insulation at times is also worth it. There's also much more affordable, easier, quicker to install stuff like I was mentioning Hempitecture. They built a factory in the middle of Idaho hemp fields and have like a very closed loop cycle that they can do that makes their product extremely inexpensive It's close to fiberglass cost. And you could just put hemp wool bats into the ceiling, and that's a super DIY friendly type thing. Is it the ideal insulation approach? From a performance standpoint, no, bats never work as well as blown, but it's a lot better than doing something that's toxic for you and toxic for the planet. That's for sure.
Very cool, guys.
One thing, Sarah, if I could just really quick, just in a quick way to wrap this up based on the experience I've had with potential buyers. There's a real practical application for this. And it may not be inherently apparent because never before have homes been built to this level where they can actually be part of an overall lifestyle. So I think there's great applicability for people with breathing difficulties or hyperallergenic people who really need something in their home that's going to eliminate all those allergens and all those contaminants that exacerbate their health issues. So never before has a house been built to this level. So it could be part of their medical solution. There's also a really key part, if anybody on the call or who watches this recording have athlete clients, there is not a house that's been built that could actually be part of their health plan and their performance plan to keep them at the peak of their performance. So that's a really interesting application. And then just practically, these homes are so quiet. You don't realize how raucous your house is until you walk into a Vali home, and the Muse in particular. Everything's silent. You shut the door. It's like a noise canceling headphone. You seal the door, the noise is gone. There's a level of noise in the city you don't realize is there until you can't hear it anymore. And I think that's a really cool application too. So I would encourage everybody to come by this weekend to the open house on Earth Day, 1 to 3, 1740 East Ocotillo, and have a listen for yourself. It's pretty special.
Yeah, Adrienne, I think those are great points to make too, because people have been moving to the Valley for decades for health issues. Right. And what a great opportunity for them to not only be in a drier climate and have some better breathing issues, but then the availability of these homes. Like, this really gives people with those issues the opportunity to live their best life and live their healthiest life. And then athletes as well. We have a lot with spring training and all the athletes and all the sports that we have here. I mean, we've got Olympic athletes that come here and train because they can train year round. So I think those are really great ideas for anybody who's working with potential clients of that nature here in the Phoenix area.
And we are 7th worst for particulate matter in our air in the Valley. So while it may look pretty clear and fresh out, the reality is it's not. And inside these homes, the air is filtered to a level beyond a hospital operating room. So the experience is completely different. I think anybody, and Sarah, if you want to come to on Saturday, you'll within a few minutes of being in there, you'll realize how different it is. And we thank you for the opportunity too.
Oh, absolutely, guys. This was great having you on today. This was so much really good information. Like I said, I was personally really excited about it. I know my mind, I'm going to be watching this recording again. Just
there's a lot today. Sorry for that.
Oh, it's great, Lucas. You did an awesome job.
It's such great information. So Lucas and Austin's contacts are up here. If you guys do have any other questions that you would like to ask them, I'm going to wrap up today with just going over some of the other upcoming classes that we have. And like I said, if you guys have any questions, let them know. We've got Market Insights recordings. They are now available. These are our monthly market stats. Reach out to your business development manager for a copy of those. And then, of course, spring training. The 8-week class series is still going on. There are 2 weeks left. If you want to get on that for either of those topics, let us know. We can get you registered. And then tomorrow, there is the Whiskey Row Tour, landmark title up in our Prescott area. This is going to be tomorrow. It starts at 3 p.m. at the Old Bakery. It says 2:15 on there, but I saw a post from Michelle that says it is 3. So if you're a Prescott agent, or you would like to just go spend the afternoon up in Prescott learning about the rich history up there, please attend. And then we also have a CE class tomorrow as well. This is going to be tomorrow morning at the Atrium in Arrowhead. It is the Advanced Exchange Tax Code 1031. You're going to get 3 hours of legal issues. This is an in-person class. So I believe there is still a little bit of room. If you need your legal issue credits, reach out. Renee is hosting this and she can get you registered. And then we've got the Biltmore Luxury Tour. This is every 4th Wednesday or the 4th Wednesday of every month. 9 a.m. is the start time. You meet at the Camelback Lakes office. That's off of 2720 East Camelback Road. This is a great tour. I participated in this tour a lot before the pandemic. And if you guys really want to see some unique home specimens in the Biltmore area, this is a great one. And it's free, of course. And then coming up all the way into May, yes, guys, it is almost May, our Prescott office is doing a lunch and learn event on tips and tricks for a hassle-free transaction. This is going to be Tuesday, May 9th from 11:15 to 12:30. Lunch is provided at our Landmark Prescott office. And then moving all the way ahead, the next in the series of Here Comes the Judge is going to be June 15th from 1 to 2 p.m. We've done this one other time up there. It had a great turnout. It was a lot of fun. So save the date, June 15th, August 17th, or October 26th. And that's it for us today, guys. Thank you all so much for being on. Thank you, Adrian, Lucas, and Austin.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Awesome, Sarah. Thanks.
Y'all go this Saturday and go check out these homes. Touch the banisters, touch those, handles, and really feel and experience what it's like to be in such a well-made, well-thought-out home.
Yep.
Thank you so much. That's very
Everybody
well said.
soon.
And then, of course, thank you to Landmark Title for allowing us to bring you Marketing Matters every Wednesday at 10 a.m. We do have 7 offices here in the Valley, 1 in Prescott and 2 in the Nevada area to service all of your title and escrow needs. So y'all have a great day and we'll see you next week.
I know.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.